This is a picture from the Queen's 90th birthday in 2016. And I just wanted to give a sense, first off, of the kind of magnet that Buckingham Palace still is to this day. So it still acts as a gathering place for events. So Prince Philip's death earlier this year would have drawn large crowds like this, but the virus stopped that happening. And let's go into the history of the palace a bit before we look inside at the staterooms. So going way back, this is a map of London in the 1500s, which shows the original core of the city of London here. And down in the west along the Thames is the city of Westminster. And this was the seat of royal power since the time of William the Conqueror in 1066, 1,000 years ago. And Westminster Abbey was built up in the 1312 and the 1300s. And over here was land that came into the hands of Henry VIII. And this was then where Buckingham Palace was built, on a little bit of land just over here, way out in the countryside. And one of the first houses was in the early 1700s, built by the Duke of Buckingham, and it then became known as Buckingham House. You can see it here with the Abbey, Westminster Abbey, in the background, before the two towers were built in the mid-1700s. One interesting bit about the land ownership of Buckingham Palace is that James I, in the early 1600s, he sold off a lot of the land, but he kept one little bit as freehold, which he grew mulberry trees on, which was around the area of the current Buckingham Palace. A non-royal member of society tried to buy the land, and he thought he had. But this was in the time of the English Civil War in the mid-1600s, and Charles I never got round to actually putting the seal on this purchase. And so in the mid-1700s, when George III bought this house and the surrounding land, he was able to do so because technically it still belonged to the crown because of that little tweak, which is quite an interesting thing. Also, the owner, the Duke of Buckingham, he was a very keen connoisseur of art and the new explorations of the world in the early 1700s. And there's an interesting theory that the first cup of tea ever was actually drunk in this house because he went specially to get tea from abroad and had it brought back to this house and was one of the first people to do so. So maybe true, maybe not, but it's quite a nice little story. Someone's audio is on, Robert. I'm hearing a bit of background noise, but if your audio is on.
That's me, sir.
Oh, yeah. Shut up. So another view of this early 1700s house. So this is before it was owned by George III, the King of England. And so it's a very simple but handsome building. It's not particularly flowery. It's very Georgian. It's quite stripped down, very classical, quite elegant. And it became known as the Queen's House because George III's wife, Charlotte, the house was actually meant for her as a private retreat from St. James's Palace nearby, which was where the main royal functions were done. So it's just a simple 3-story house with these wings making a 3-sided space around this central area. And actually, as we'll see, this basic design is still there, and the original building is actually still there in the current Buckingham Palace, but it's been quite heavily covered over. It was really out in the countryside, and in the reign of George III and his wife Charlotte, it became a seat of both elegant parties, of masked balls, of art and literature in the high society. But it was also a place where Queen Charlotte would hold court. And she would have favorites from the art world or the literary world who would come in and chat with her, or they would entertain her and entertain the king. So it became a real center of elegance in the 1700s. But then George III, he died, and George IV came to power, who was very extravagant, and he started the Regency period of this sort of high fashion, very often his style, his taste was very flamboyant, very extravagant. And he wanted to change Buckingham Palace into a comfortable home for himself. And this happened in the 1820s after he had become king. But then as the work was in progress, he had a change of mind. And he actually wanted it then to be a proper royal palace for, welcoming ambassadors and having state ceremonies, doing what monarchs do. So he hired John Nash, who had a history of theatre design. And John Nash started working on this massive remodeling of Buckingham House, which was now Buckingham Palace. And this is where the current Buckingham Palace that you probably know today starts to take shape. It's more overtly classical with these columns coming down and these triangular pediments. So John Nash embellished the existing three-sided form with these columns, but keeping the old core of this older Georgian house still inside. And at the front was the marble arch, which was an arch, and this was here until the 1830s when it was moved away to Hyde Park, where it still is to this day. Here it is again, just with the marble arch. So this is in the 1820s and 1830s when it was like this. So Queen Victoria was the first monarch to actually move in and live there in 1827, I believe, or 1837. Sorry, I always get the dates a bit wrong. 1837. Yeah. Here's an image of the royal family inside this central court. So you can see the original Georgian building from the early 1700s, these simple windows and this three-floored building, and then the more extravagant work by John Nash under George IV. In the mid-1850s, Queen Victoria started to complain that the palace wasn't big enough for her and Albert and the family, which was rapidly growing. Can you imagine? This huge mansion wasn't big enough. And so they planned this east wing here, huge east wing, to make the palace big enough and roomy enough for the whole work of the court. And until 1913, it looked like this. It was more stripped down than what it is today. The stone quality was really bad. And so in 1913, it was remodeled with Portland stone, and it's the current form that you can see today with this famous balcony where the royal family come and wave from. So today you come and stand at the front of the palace here and sort of gawp through the gates. This is the original part of the house here, which was the living quarters of Charlotte and George III for some time. And it's this area here, which are the state rooms. So as a guest or as a tourist, you enter through here, through the Queen's Gallery, and then you can come up into the state rooms and look around. Again, that's usually in August and September when you can do that. By the way, the Queen's private apartments are over here on this side of the palace. There's also a huge garden out the back. It's the biggest private garden in London, where they hold state parties and events in the summer. And the Queen and the royal family go and meet all these different people. So let's go and look inside the rooms. Sorry, that's something I'm not going to talk about now because I'm running out of time already. So inside, this is an old painting from the 1800s when this interior was remodeled by John Nash. So this is where you enter as a tourist, or you would enter as an ambassador, for example, or as some member of a different state or a different country who's coming for an event at Buckingham Palace in the state rooms. So you're led up this staircase and come up to the great staircase. So this is it here. So this is the main entrance to the state rooms when you come up here, and then you would go through towards the throne room, as we'll see. I mentioned that John Nash, the architect, had a history with theatre design, and this staircase is really quite theatrical. It's making a pageant out of this visit to the monarchy. And this is Queen Victoria's painting choice. These are all members of her family. So the design is that as you're entering the state rooms, you effectively meet the whole royal family before meeting the monarch herself. This is an image of it in the mid 1800s. It's actually not a very big space. It's quite cramped. This shows the queue of people getting into a state ball in the state rooms. So the first state room that you come into from the staircase is the green drawing room. So still to this day, when there are state occasions, this is where people gather before they are moved into other rooms. So this is, in a sense, the main reception room. And it's been green since John Nash's time in the early 1800s. But before that, in the 1700s, the time of Charlotte, this was her little throne room. And this was where she held court, especially during the Regency period when George III was sick with porphyria, mad. She actually held court in this room, which I'll get to in a sec with a photo of that, picture of that. But this is another view from the green room. So as you come up from the staircase, you enter into this room. So one of the dominating paintings are these two of George III and Queen Charlotte. George III looking just crazily regal, and Queen Charlotte here. This is how it looked in Queen Charlotte's time in the late 1700s. So there wasn't a doorway here through to the throne room, but the rough space of the room is still the same. And the history of the room is really quite interesting to just imagine this ruling monarchy ruling out of these rooms in their daily lives and state lives is, I find, intriguing. And the green is matched by the furniture. So a lot of this furniture was bought by George IV in the early 1800s, and he bought so much of it for places like Windsor Castle and Carlton House, which was nearby to Buckingham Palace, but is now not there anymore. And so a lot of this furniture was left over and could be used in these rooms, in the staterooms of Buckingham Palace. What's nice is that a lot of these furnitures, they're quite worn because they're in constant use. They've been in constant use for 200 years. So the armrests, for example, are kind of often threadbare, which I find much more interesting and kind of juicy than going to a pristine palace somewhere else where it's not used anymore. I like the fact that the staterooms are still very much used. I mean, there's something like 800 staff working in Buckingham Palace. I mean, it's a huge venue in itself. And the green is also matched with these beautiful porcelains. So there's something called Sèvres porcelain, and these ones are soft paste porcelain, which was in the 1700s, the early 1700s, this soft paste porcelain was the technology that they could do, trying to make porcelain like the Chinese did. And soft paste was much harder to do, but the color was much more vibrant than the later hard paste porcelain. So these are very, very pricey porcelains from Sèvres, which is a factory near Paris in the time of Louis XV, this grand period in France. Sèvres was one of these very, very popular, very prestigious ceramic makers. And they had a sale every year. And George IV, these were some of his favorite objects, this Sèvres porcelain. There's a funny story. There's a big collection of these in the Wallace collection, which is a beautiful gallery and museum in London, free to go into. And the Queen was being shown around there once, and she was being shown the Sèvres porcelain. And she said, "Oh yes, it's very nice. Of course, we use ours," which is really funny. But they're so gorgeous, and I find anyway, and they're very Rococo, which was this Louis XV style in France. It's very floral, very flirty, lots of pastel pinks and blues and purples, which is kind of cheesy, I think, by today's tastes generally. But I love it. It's such a little moment in history, in the history of art, when this flirty, very aristocratic world explodes into these ceramics and paintings. And it didn't last actually very long. Also, there is a very rare Sèvres porcelain piece which was owned by Madame du Pompadour, who was, I think, Louis the 16th mistress, and she was a real patron of the arts. So it's quite a provenance for this thing, you know, where it came from, that it was owned by Madame du Pompadour. It's a potpourri holder. So in the summer, you would put flowers in these holes and it would emit this scent. And in the winter, potpourri used to just be scented oils, which you would pour in, and then it would make the room smell nice. And here it is, just in a better background. I mean, really incredible craftsmanship to make this, again, from soft paste. It was a hard craft. And peeking out from under the green vases I showed you is this amazing commode. I mean, I find this so incredible. There's some of the best furniture in the whole of England in the Buckingham Palace staterooms. It's really incredible. Most of it is French. So these panels are called pietra dura. It just means hard stone. And they're stones that are polished and very, very, very carefully cut and then inlaid into wood to make it look like fruit or flowers. And these are actually from the time of Louis XIV in the 1600s. Many of them were taken out of the old furniture, which was destroyed. It wasn't seen as very fashionable after a while, but these pieces were seen as so beautiful and lovely that they were kept, and they were put into this commode in 1778 by Martin Carlin. And I just find them so luxurious and vibrant, and kind of like you just want to take them out and eat them. And the craftsmanship to do these is very exquisite, and yeah, I just find them really, really lovely. But all of the furniture, I mean, decorations in the staterooms are really, really sumptuous. Yeah. So then going through the green drawing room, if you were on a more official state occasion, you would meet the Queen in here, and you can see this throne space. These chairs are the chairs of the state, and next to them are some interesting chairs in themselves, which I'll get to in a bit later. This room is one of the more important rooms that John Nash designed, again with this theatrical element to it. This room is used for state photos, especially family photos, like the wedding of William and Kate. This room, the throne room, was used. So this is the theatricality. You get almost this stage-like theatre feel with these winged cherubs, winged angels flocking down from above over this space. As you enter after this whole pageant, this whole show, you finally enter this room like the grand stage itself. So one of the chairs in the corner is actually the coronation chair of Queen Victoria. So this is the chair that she was sitting on before she was crowned on the throne, which is in Westminster Abbey. This was the original colour scheme under John Nash, and probably it was more spectacular then than it is today, because it was all reds and golds, except for the white of the friezes above, which I'll get to in a sec, and then these white angels. So it really brought out this contrast. So you get the sense of much more theatricality with this old painting than with the modern day room. So up on the top around the room are these friezes and these heraldic shields. So these are shields from the history of England. So families, dynasties, royal families, nobles in the history of England, going back hundreds of years. And the friezes around the edge, they show scenes from the Wars of the Roses in the late 1400s, the end of which Henry VII married Elizabeth of York, as you can see here in the detail. And this united the two families and it brought peace. So the message is that through the royal power, peace can come, unity in a country through a monarchy. I really like this chair, which is also in the throne room. There are two of them actually, by Tatum, Bailey and Sanders. So it's a pair of council chairs, and these were used by George IV. They're modeled on ancient Roman chairs, but I just again find them so sumptuous. So they're wood with bronze gilding, with these sphinxes and their wings going up around the chair. So it's got this interesting mix of very ancient, but also something more modern, sort of bringing back the past in this sumptuous way. I like that kind of stuff. So this is the picture gallery, and it divides the four central rooms that are the state rooms. So on one side, you have the green drawing room and the throne room. You have the picture gallery in the middle, and then the white drawing room and the blue drawing room on the other side, which I'll get to in a sec. But the picture gallery, again, this is a John Nash creation with this natural light coming in to flood this space, has some really amazing pictures, paintings, and also sculptures and ornaments. The royal collection, of which these paintings are a part, is the largest private art collection in the world. And they have some real treasures, I think. I'll show you some of them. So there are some lovely sculptures and ceramics here, as there is everywhere in the staterooms, but I really like this one. It's a Japanese lacquered dish with gold, I think it's bronze actually, later work on it. So the actual Japanese dish is from the 1600s, and then it's the 1700s later work on it. But I just find it really, really lovely, especially the Japanese part of it. And this interesting mix of these two cultures. So taking this Japanese ornament from somewhere so alien to the Western world in the 1600s, and then forging this European style around it. It's really, really interesting. And above that is a painting by Johannes Vermeer, The Music Lesson, which is a really subtle, delicate painting by Vermeer, who was part of the Dutch Golden Age. And this is a really old part of the collection. This goes back to the mid 1700s when George III bought it off an Englishman who was living in Venice, an art dealer. It's a woman and potentially her husband or a suitor or maybe a music teacher at a virginal, and she's playing music. He's maybe singing. Music in Dutch art was a real theme. There were lots of different connotations with different instruments, and music was a sort of a spiritual medium as well. The message on the instrument says in Latin, music is a companion in pleasure and a balm in sorrow. So there may be some tension in the relationship between these two people. It may be the scene of a marriage and the healing power of music. I'm more interested in just the light. You know, it's so amazing how the light comes in through these windows and then slowly fades away into the deeper part of the room. The mirrors, the shadows on the mirror are accurate to how they would be. In typical Dutch style, there's this reflection here of the woman, and you can see the artist's easel in the background. There's just such a different way of painting as well, from the real rigidity of the chair to this soft reflection of her face and this hard, creamy porcelain jug. It's really, I find it a really lovely, lovely painting. Yeah. And a couple of landscapes. So this one is by Claude Lorraine, who was a French artist in the 1600s. He was really popular in the aristocratic royal circles for his depictions of Rome, especially. And he depicts these grand landscapes with classical ruins often. And these became very popular and helped to inspire the trips that young men made, the grand tour where they would go around Italy and Greece and look at these old places and art from across the world to educate themselves. You can just see St. Peter's Basilica in the distance of Rome. So it's a lovely painting in itself. It's an early landscape painting, but it's also interesting how the wider connotations of this painting help to forge an identity of the cultured member of society. And a very exuberant landscape by Rubens, milkmaids with cattle in a landscape. His style developed in the period of the Baroque, which was this very kind of booming, loud, exuberant, colorful, almost shocking artistic style in a reaction against the Reformation, a reaction against the Protestant church. So the Baroque is part of the counter-Reformation, where they tried to blow people's hearts and minds open with this amazing art. And Rubens traveled to Italy, and he loved this style and incorporated into his own work with mischief and cellulite buttocks and breasts and big cheeks and all kinds of bold things, which made him very split between being very popular and people being disgusted with his style. So this painting doesn't have that much kind of naked flesh, which he's quite famous for, but it's quite a lively, alive, joyful painting. And then a painting by Frans Hals, Portrait of a Man, very original title. Frans Hals was really popular in his time, but also became really popular in the 1800s. People like Manet and Van Gogh really liked him because he was quite modern in a way. His painting was very confident. It was very, he would just paint quite fluidly, apparently without much detailed planning. And so you get this quite washy, very washy background. The face is not in that much detail, but then the clothing is often really in detail. The ruff is in detail, and it kind of brings out the physicality of the body. But perhaps the life itself is in one particular moment, and it's transient. So it's like a still from a cinema, like an old cinema shot or something, sort of a timeless, I don't know, like a look into a particular moment or something. And that's something that modern art tried to do in the 1800s. His elbow kind of poking out of the canvas, like really in your face. But Frans Hals is very famous for this painting in the Wallace collection, the Laughing Cavalier. You can see kind of similarities with that, with this way that he tries to bring something out of the canvas to the viewer. And then there is the White Drawing Room. So this is one of the principal rooms, the state rooms. It's one of the most lavish, and it's often used for the background when the Queen is doing her speech, her yearly speech in December. It's the background that Robert used on the introduction. And it's often used for the more prestigious or important or key members of a party or a state occasion, that they are separated from the group and will meet the Queen privately in this room. It's quite funny. I'll get to it in a sec. There's actually a secret entrance. So people wait in there, and then the Queen pops out of the secret entrance, sort of like, hello. The room is quite dominated by this one painting of Queen Alexandra, which is an amazing early 1900s portrait. It's really powerful, and kind of, she's like a naval ship, you know, an elegant naval ship steaming towards you. It's really quite powerful. So Queen Alexandra was the wife of Edward VII, part of the Edwardian era. Some of her jewelry is really interesting because she's wearing a necklace around here full of all kinds of precious diamonds and stones. And she's got the Koh-i-Noor diamond here on a kind of brooch. This diamond it's the largest diamond in the world. I'm pretty sure it's certainly up there. It's 110 carats or something insane. And it's only worn by the female members of the monarchy, because it goes back about 500 or 600 years, this diamond. It was in the hands of people like Shah Jahan, the guy who had the Taj Mahal built, who came to a bit of a sticky end. And many of the men in history who owned this diamond came to quite sticky ends. So when it came into the royal collection as a gift from India, it was deemed to only be given to women, because it was seen that with men it was really unlucky. And that's still something that happens, which is really, really interesting. So this is the secret entrance in the corner. It must be one of the most lavish private doors, because attached to it is this huge mirror and these candles and this beautiful cabinet, again with beautiful inlays in it. So the whole thing opens quite slowly as people are waiting, and then the Queen with entourage, or perhaps the whole royal family, will come out and then greet the guests. There's a pretty incredible piano in there, which was made by Erard in the 1850s for Queen Victoria. So it's mahogany with brass gilding, and it's full of all kind of artistic and musical flirtations. But it's certainly a conversation piece if you were to bring that out at a party. Queen Victoria was really keen on music and singing, and the Buckingham Palace and the other palaces were full of music before Albert died in, I think, around 1860. And then she went into mourning, and there was no more music for some time in the palaces. But here you can see the Queen's speech, and she's in this white drawing room with the piano behind her. This is the Queen Mother, Elizabeth, and George VI at the piano. And by the way, the doors, I mean, don't ignore the details in the staterooms if or when you go. The doors are incredible. The flooring is beautiful, but I wanted to point out the doors. They're mahogany doors with beautiful inlays of enamel and brass and bronze. They're really, really lovely doors. So passing on from the white room, you would come to the music room. This is one of the rooms that remains pretty much completely unchanged since its design from John Nash. A lot of the other rooms have some kind of color change or design change, but this room stayed the same with these blue columns. And this used to be the music room where music performances would be put on. But now it just functions. They still do some performances there, but this now functions as a mingling room if you're on a state visit there. And then there's the blue room, which isn't blue anymore. It's quite red, but it used to be colored blue. They still keep blue Sèvres porcelain here, which you can see on the tables over here, but it's not overtly blue anymore. Here's some of this, again, lovely Sèvres porcelain, which I really like, but I guess it's quite subjective. And this is probably one of the most ornate, lavish, small tables in England. It's Table of the Great Commanders of Antiquity. And it was made by Sèvres. So all of these little pieces, these little faces, are this very delicate porcelain. And they show different commanders from antiquity, with Alexander the Great at the center, and then different famous commanders around. It was made for Napoleon, the Napoleon. But after he fell from power, his successor gifted it to George IV. And George IV took it on himself in this vein of, I'm a great commander of antiquity. So this is now still in the Blue Room, and you can just go and look at it. I mean, it's incredible how much attention went into it in detail, and the beauty in it is really lovely, even if the connotations of these great commanders is really, outdated. Here's George IV, again, looking insanely regal, leaning on this table. It was one of his most prized objects, along with the Sèvres porcelain. Here it is just from the top. Each of the faces has a scene from their lives beneath it. It's just really, really lavish. A couple of the other rooms that you may not get to see. So those rooms are the ones that you can quite easily see on a standard visit as a traveler. This is the state dining room, where more intimate dinners are held. But for dinners on a larger scale, they have the ballroom. So this is the biggest room amongst the staterooms in the palace. And it's pretty massive. And it gives occasion for the royal family to bring out their incredible cutlery. They have amazing gold-lined plates and cups and all kinds of things that they bring out at certain occasions, with this very regal, again, very theatrical space for the monarchs to sit, or at least to enter and to start the meal. Here you can see the space when it's really full up. And this space is perhaps more recognizably today used for knighting. So you'll see people knighted in this room, in the ballroom, when it's not used for dinners. So, yes, I went through that quicker than I thought I would. So I'm sorry that it's fallen a bit short, but more time for questions. And yeah, so that's the end of the talk. So sorry it finished before the hour, but yeah.
Well, that's okay, no problem. Let's see. Yeah, I'm trying to knock off some of the questions on my own, like the administrative type ones.
Right. But anyway, thank you everyone for joining. Really, really appreciate you joining in, and I hope you enjoyed it.
I know I did. It was awesome. So thank you. So we were talking about this before offline. Tell us about what you do in London, your online stuff, and then at some point in time, you're going to start doing the in-person tours.
Yeah.
I'll paste your contact info in the chat.
I put this screen up. This is my email address here. It's also my PayPal address. If you want to donate, very welcome.